All right, another thing that we need to consider with scopes is magnification. That's another fairly important one. When it comes to fixed scopes, most of my shooting is done in the prone. I do practice other positions, but most of the time I'm just target shooting. So if I go with a fixed scope like the SWFA, I tend to like a little bit more magnification than I would say that I need. So they make these in I think a 10, 12, 16, and 20. But I also use these for my 22 as well. So on these, I prefer to go with the 20 magnification, something like a 223 where I'm not shooting out, extremely far, more in the mid ranges. I think a 16 would work just fine. As far as a variable scope, I would say something in the 3 to 15 would be really the minimum. That's just my preference. I prefer, that would be the minimum preference, but I really prefer more like a 5 to 27, or I guess it's 4.5 to 27, 5 to 20, somewhere in that range. I think my Vortex just came out with a new one, I think it's a 6 to 36 or something. I would really love to have one of those, but I do prefer having a little bit more magnification because I would rather have it than and not need it than need it and not have it. Another thing is, I would say, the scope tube. So they make scopes with 1 inch, 30 millimeter, 34 millimeter, 35 millimeter. I've even seen some 40 millimeters. For our purposes, you're gonna see probably the more common is gonna be a 30 millimeter. So I'm gonna recommend at a very minimum, 30 millimeter tube and a 42 objective lens. That would be my recommendation for a minimum. But I do like the 34, 35 tubes, and then 56 objective lens is my preferred. I think my other one I have is a 30 millimeter tube and 50 objective lens. Another thing that is extremely important, if you have a mill reticle, you are going to absolutely want mill turrets. That means it's going to dial exactly what is in your scope. Your reticle and your turrets match. That is extremely important in my opinion. They do make some very low end. I'm sure they make a high end somewhere, but you'll see that a lot of low end scopes. It'll be like a mill dot reticle and then MOA turrets. That's really not the best thing to learn on. It causes more issues, if you're doing just holdovers, it's probably okay, but it just makes things more complicated. Definitely have your reticle and your turrets matching. Now, I don't get like super into glass coatings and all this different type of stuff, but I do prefer, obviously, if I have the money, something like the HD glass. I do like to have nice glass, but something like the SWFA scopes, they don't have the best glass, but it's still very clear, still works, gets the job done. I've used this exact scope on my 338 to shoot out to a mile and out to 2,000 yards, and the same on my 50 BMG. And these things hold up really well. I didn't want to spend a ton of money on those just because I don't shoot them so often that I need that high-end scope. I would rather save that for something that I do shoot more often. Another thing that I do prefer is just kind of how the turrets feel. I like a nice click. I hope you can hear that. And then also, when I'm looking at scopes, I want to make sure that the actual lines on them line up. I do notice on some scopes they'll be off just a little bit, so I don't know if you'd be able to. I don't think there's enough light, but I want to make sure that there's not enough light, but you can see the lines on here, and then there's a line indicator right here on the front. I just checked those to make sure that it actually lines up, that the lines are even. Some scopes, they're going to be off just a little bit, and for whatever reason, that just really bothers me because I don't know if I'm at, am I at 0.3? It shows, 3.5. Am I actually at 0.3 or am I at 0.4? So I do like to have that. Another thing that I highly recommend is a bubble level. You're definitely going to get one of these. In the next set of videos, we're going to talk about installing the scope and all this other stuff, and I would highly recommend a bubble level on the scope because we don't want any kind of cant in our rifle. If we have that cant, basically that bullet's going to come up and because it's canted a little bit, it's going to end up going off whichever way it's canted, and that could give us that's going to give us errors. But then we may be reading that as way more wind or less wind or whatever it is, and in our and when we're trying to learn, what I kind of teach is going from to where the hit is and going backwards and figuring out why it hit where it did in the beginning. And if we're hitting way off to the right and we're thinking, oh, okay, well then it has to be this amount of wind, then what we're seeing when we're reading mirage and what we're feeling on our bodies and the way we read wind to learn, okay, this is what this is, it's going to throw that off. So we definitely want a bubble level. Other than that, as far as the scope itself, definitely just do your research. I always recommend spend good money, save up the money. My only thing I would say about that is like with the SWFAs, just because they're $299, it's a very, very good scope for the price. If you're not going to go with something like this, then I'm going to tell you to save your money and buy the highest quality scope you can, because that is going to make all the difference in your shooting. Other than that, this is an investment. You can buy a scope and a rifle, and then other than particularly, the barrel, that's almost going to last you pretty much your life, unless you're shooting so much that you wear out the barrel. So it is an investment, and I want you to think about it that way. So you don't want to buy, $1,500 gun or $2,000 gun, $2,000, $3,000 scope, and then put cheap rings on it. So, buy quality rings. I really like the Vortex rings or something like the spur mounts. I think that's how you say it. Very high quality. So make sure we got good rings on there. And I think that is it as far as scopes go. I believe I covered everything that I wanted to cover. There are all kind of different features and things in a scope. Like this one doesn't have a zero stop, which that's not a big deal to me. What I do is I actually take a silver permanent marker. I don't know if you can see it, but I've got a mark on there, and I've got a mark on the side on the windage as well. So when I have to dial way, way out, I can turn this down and it lines up perfectly, and then I know exactly where my zero is. There are some shims that you can do, just like small washers that you can put in scopes if you have something like this where you can have a zero stop. But the zero stop's not a huge deal for me. So I would say maybe the only other thing is caps. Definitely get some caps. That's going to protect dust from getting in there. I think there's Butler Creek caps, very inexpensive, like $5 or $7. These Vortex caps, I like. They're really nice. They're like rubberized, and then the good thing about these is they snap closed. But then when you open them, you can actually lay them all the way flat. Or if you'd like, nope, they just go flat. I think on the Butler Creeks they'll actually stand up. So on the back ones, when you open that up, you can actually, if you need to put some information in there, some range card or anything in there, you can put a little information. You're dope. But I think that's about it. Thank you guys for watching. Next up, we are now going to be getting into what I would call the good stuff. So trying to get all the talking and all the points and all that stuff kind of out of the way and get into mounting and learning how to shoot. So stay tuned. I know some of this other stuff is a little bit boring, but we are getting into the good stuff, I promise. Thank you guys.